It is all a question of imagination. Our responsibility begins with the power to imagine. Addressing climate change is not just a career path, it is actually a responsibility. It's a responsibility to yourself, to your community, to the planet, and to future generations. But it's also a responsibility that could be profitable if you have the right skills and the right network. My job today is to help you figure out how to navigate the environmental industry to find a rewarding career in climate change science and policy. But who am I, and what makes me qualified to give you this advice? Zico already gave me a brief intro, but just to add some more to it, this is me. I'm an environmental consultant that develops strategies, policies, and programs for governments so that they could tackle climate change. From this table here, you could see that most of my projects throughout my career have been here in Trinidad and Tobago. However, I've been fortunate to use my skills in climate change policy and in science to help neighboring countries as well. So this puts me in a very unique position, not only to know what it takes to be a climate change professional in Trinidad and Tobago, but also what it takes to be a climate change professional in the region. Now, I could just tell you outright, maybe, hey, I think these are the next 3 steps that you should take in order to join this profession. But have you ever heard the saying, if you give a man a fish, he'll be fed for a day, but if you teach a man how to fish, he'll be fed for life? Well, that's kind of what I want to do today. I don't want to just give you a straightforward instruction, right? I want to teach you how to think about the climate change and environmental industry so that you will be able to identify opportunities and build a rewarding career that suits you. So from my experience, and this is something that I learned over maybe 8 years of practice, I think that aspiring climate change practitioners should systematically gain knowledge of the climate change sector using 2 mental frameworks. Now, these aren't published in any books or any kind of thing. These are just ways that I've chosen to represent them so that you can have a clear understanding in your mind as to how you should categorize and think about information and how that can help you with your career. On the left-hand side is something that I call the scale model. And there you could see that there are different concentric circles, right? And the innermost circle is the national level, things that happen in your specific country, wherever you may be from. Beyond that is the regional circle, which is a regional response, a group of countries, a geographical area. And then finally, it's the international layer, which is all countries. In a career in climate change policy, it is important that you are able to recognize what are the policies that take place at the national level, at the regional level, and even at the international level, how they interact with one another. And it's not just about the policies. You can also look at things from a technical perspective as well, because the science, the opportunities for science, the scientific focus also varies between national, regional, and international. So it's very important that you have that in your mind all the time. Whenever you are faced with a situation in this career, ask yourself, at what level are you operating? The second model on the right-hand side talks about what I call the actor relationships, right? And in society, there are different, what I call them actors, right? There is, on the top of the pyramid, I mean, you could really rotate this in any way. There's no real top, but for the sake of the diagram, there is the public sector or the governance bodies, and they are all connected to civil society organizations, private sector organizations, and academic and research institutions. These 4 actors all have a different role in climate change, and they also play a different role at different scales. So, for example, at the national level, you will obviously have, in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, you would have a national government, you would have civil NGOs and CSOs that operate in Trinidad and Tobago, that's their scope. You will have private sector companies that are taking climate action at the level of the country, and you'll have universities in your country doing projects as well. But if you zoom out to the regional level, even at the regional level, there's a governance structure. In our context, that's CARICOM. There are regional NGOs and CSOs doing climate change work. There are regional, or what I should say, multinational private sector companies that do climate change work. And there are also regional institutions for research and study that do work. And it goes out again when you zoom out to the international level. There's a framework, there's a governance structure that addresses climate change. We call that the United Nations, specifically under the Framework Convention on Climate Change. There are global CSOs and NGOs doing work. There are multinational global companies, and likewise, there are global systems of education as well. I share this with you because the amount of information that you will come across as you pursue a career in environment and climate change is staggering. And it is helpful for you to sort of understand where and at what level this information is coming from. And as a young practitioner, for you to recognize where you want to be or where you are right now. Is your goal to operate only at the national level and address climate action through an NGO? Do you see yourself working at the international level, at the UN, guiding research with some of the top scientific minds? This framework helps you understand where structures are, where organizations are, and helps you create a map. And the second thing that I would want to tell you all is that it's not always so clear, which is why I didn't outright tell you, do A, B, and C. You should look at this diagram here. Shows me, reminds me of a story, and I shared it here because it reminds me of a story when I was young, when I was about 8 years old. I didn't really understand how life worked, so I asked my mom, well, mom, tell me about how life works. And she said, well, you go to school. I was in primary school. So I go to primary school, then you go to secondary school, then you go to university, then you get a job, then you get promoted, and then you retire. That's sort of like how I thought life was supposed to work, right? And maybe that's how it works for my parents' generation, but it certainly isn't how it works today, in my opinion. And it certainly isn't how it works in a career and climate change policy. It just simply can't. So I encourage everyone getting into this field, not only to have the right mental frameworks for thinking about things, but also to take advantage of opportunities to try on different hats that test your understanding, that introduce you to new ideas, and that grow your network of people. My background has been really diverse. I've worked at universities, I've worked at NGOs, I've worked in government regulator, and I've worked in private sector, and even now I'm an entrepreneur. I have my own company where I'm the principal environmental consultant doing climate change work in the region. So really and truly, if I had to map it out, it looks less like the diagram on the top and more like the diagram at the bottom. There's always going to be twists and turns in your career path, but you shouldn't be intimidated by that. You should know that the diversity of experiences that you undertake could only make you stronger. And the most successful people in this field are the people who are able to integrate experience and information from different sectors and disciplines and bring them together. But more importantly, being able to build a network of professionals will really help take you far in this. I just want to draw an example before I move on. A lot of people know broadly that going towards climate change, as we try to adapt and mitigate, there's a push towards renewables. And a lot of people decide, and okay, they're going to study that locally, and they end up coming out with first degrees and second degrees in renewable energy specializations, without understanding quite that the market right now in Trinidad and Tobago, does not have available jobs immediately for renewable energy specialists. So it puts them in a tough spot. And I really wouldn't want you to think that it's such a linear, straightforward pattern. Go get a degree in renewables, I come out, I get a job, I get promoted, and that's sort of what it is. It's definitely, the world is in a transition period. And as new things arise and develop, you're going to have a real roller coaster ride of experiences. But notwithstanding all of that, you should still always have a vision of where you kind of want to go. It doesn't really matter where you start with climate change, too. Climate change is a cross-cutting issue that requires collective action across many disciplines. There are people in climate change policy that didn't start off doing an environmental degree. They didn't start off writing policy. And that's because climate change touches on all disciplines across all sectors. There are many key aspects to climate change. And there are professionals from different sectors who get into the climate science and the policy from those avenues. So I listed out a few here. I wouldn't go through all, but I just want to point out some that I thought were particularly interesting. So let's say you're thinking about getting involved in climate change policy, right? Did you know that you can come into this from a finance perspective? Right now, the globe at high levels, we are trying to figure out ways to do emissions trading and ways to use financial markets to help control emissions. With blockchain technology, which is now emerging in a big field, people are integrating blockchain into emissions trading and finance as well. And all of those things could shape climate change policy. In fact, someone like myself, who's an environmental and technical specialist, I need to go and find people who understand both climate change and blockchain and finance in order to create useful policy. Maybe you didn't even know about insurance, for example. Climate change and all these disasters, they create situations where especially the poor and the underprivileged end up at the raw end of the stick, right? When a hurricane comes in, it's really those most vulnerable in society that feel it the most. Part of climate change adaptation is developing insurance policies and programs that are suitable to that level, micro insurance programs, where the premiums are suitable for low-income individuals, and they get some coverage and protection that not only protects their very limited assets, but their livelihoods that they depend on. You know, that is a growing area as well in the Caribbean region for climate change insurance. So in terms of where you enter from, you can enter from almost anywhere. You can come in from a strictly risk management position, from a disaster reduction position, finance, engineering, law. The world is your oyster. I want to point out at this point, at this slide, that no matter where you come in, as long as you're able to think about the different actors and their relationships, and you could see the gaps between policies, it will help you identify for yourself opportunities in the career that you want. I put two examples here, and they are really multiple, but I just pulled out two just to kind of give you a quick idea of what I mean. If you were familiar, for example, with the UNFCCC, which stands for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the Paris Agreement, you would know that right now we're in a place where we are trying to have an enhanced transparency framework. And there's a greater obligation for countries at the national level to report on how much emissions they're putting out, how much what they're doing to adapt to the effects of climate change, and how they are keeping track of the money that they are receiving to deal with these problems. These reporting requirements require good policy writers, people with good understanding of the Paris Agreement and the requirements thereof. It also requires people with good scientific and technical skills to do the actual technical assessment and study of keeping track and verifying and keeping inventories of the greenhouse gases that cause the blanket that warm up the earth. So where are the career opportunities? And I can tell you for sure in Trinidad and Tobago in the next 10 years, this is definitely somewhere that that will become a growing demand. From a private sector perspective, right? There is an opportunity for people who are skilled and trained in preparing greenhouse gas inventories and validating inventory data. From the public perspective, in terms of government, there's a career opportunity in people who are skilled in developing actionable policy and creating laws, legal drafting. From an academic researcher perspective, there's an opportunities to build training programs, to do courses, and to teach and train people on how to get certified in using the technical guidelines needed to fulfill these policy requirements at the international level. All of these things are opportunities. At the regional scale, for example number 2, I want to point out something called the Climate Risk Adaptation and Insurance in the Caribbean program, right? So also known as CREEC too. And in this particular program, there's a regional body that is called the Caribbean Climate Risk Insurance Facility, Segregated Portfolio Company, right? Long names. Climate change has a lot of acronyms and a lot of long names. But this organization, they've partnered with insurance companies in Germany and all throughout the world, and they are developing micro insurance projects to help low-income individuals deal with weather-related issues. So there are opportunities here as well, because this is a very nascent, growing, new thing in the Caribbean. Academic institutions, people into the hard science and science of climate change, into sociology, they have opportunities to study things known as the parametric indices, to understand the data sets that apply to Trinidad and Tobago, and to understand the data sets that apply to these low-income groups, because all of those things go into what it takes to make a successful microinsurance. And for people who are interested in being more involved in civil society, this creates an opportunity where there's a need, and there will be a need for capacity building at various levels, and to have extension services, which means to go out and interact directly with the vulnerable communities. So I know that it's sort of high level, and everything that I've said has been sort of broad. So I really look forward to some specific questions to try to help flesh out some things. But I wanted to sort of demonstrate that with the right thinking and with the right approach, you will be able to identify where your career should go and the steps it'll take to get there. Before I leave, I want to leave you with some closing thoughts, right? To anyone going into any climate change discipline, whether it's climate change policy, science, journalism, and communication, and in fact, the environmental field as a whole. Career seekers should always be open to learning. Climate change policy landscape changes every day. Every day there's a new development. In the science, there's a new development in how countries are responding, best practices, all sorts of things. It's a rapidly evolving field, and you need to be obsessed with consuming knowledge. You always need to be open to learning. Regardless of your career, it's important that you set very specific goals for yourself. You will only advance in a career if you have goals for yourself. And to be honest with you, early in my career, I didn't really have a specific goal other than to just learn everything. That was my goal, to go somewhere and learn and experience and get more information. But as times went by, I realized more and more what I liked, and I realized more and more what the opportunities were. And I started to set specific goals that I wanted to see and go after those. So when I say specific, I mean really imagine it. Imagine it clearly in your mind. See yourself, visualize it, and be as detailed in this vision as possible, because that helps you stay motivated and to go after your career path. The next thing is that I would encourage you to develop your network, because sometimes who you know is more important than what you know. And the right people at the right time can connect you to the right opportunities. That's actually the foundational basis upon which I developed my company. Because I recognize that there are a lot of people out there who have problems, and there are a lot of people who have solutions, but they don't always know each other, and they don't quite always know how to connect to one another. That's one of the main things that we do at my company, connecting people to the right opportunities. The fourth piece of advice I want you to know is to be kind with yourself. And I say that because climate change is not a problem that could be solved in our lifetime. Everyone attending this webinar, after we're dead and gone, climate change will still be here and will still be a pressing issue. It is a wicked problem that could definitely lead to burnout and disillusionment if you are in this sector, just because of the scale of it. But I want you to know that something that a former professor of mine told me is that, we are always existing on a spectrum, right, between total environmental destruction and, a perfect utopian Garden of Eden planet. And every effort that we do moves us ever so slightly towards one or the other. So even though you might not ever see that you have solved climate change, or you might feel like, this work, the problem never seems to be going down, it makes a change, a little incremental change. And be kind to yourself. in your assessment of your career and the contributions you're making to this field. And finally, I want to remind everyone to be patient. To be successful in climate change policy and science, you need to develop wisdom and credibility. And those things only come over a very long road of experience. The environmental sector as a whole is not one where you pop out with a degree and you start making money immediately, right? It is one that you start to earn really when you've developed specialized knowledge and high value skills for the time. And that takes practice and it takes time. So I hope that this has been helpful. It has given you some insight. And I really do look forward to answering some of your more pointed and specific questions. So I will bring Zico back on to let me know some thoughts. So thank you all very much. Zico, to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ryan, for a very thorough and thought-provoking presentation, as well as that very heartfelt advice. Before we get into some of the questions that have been submitted, I want to ask you one thing. What are some of the different climate change policies at different scales, and how can someone leverage that knowledge to build a career for themselves?
Sure. Okay, good. So that's a great question, Zico. So at different scales, so at the national level, I mean, I know this was shared by the Cropper Foundation. There are many people, perhaps from different countries. So I don't want to assume everyone is from Trinidad. But regardless of what island you're from or what area you're from, there are definitely policies that apply to your country. They're country level policies. In our case in Trinidad and Tobago, that would be the National Environmental Policy or the National Climate Change Policy, for instance. And when you read those policies, a policy document at a national level is aspirational, it's visionary, it's a sort of declaration of intent as to what government wants to do and what are potential opportunities for different actors, whether it's CSOs and private sectors, where they could contribute. So at a national scale, being familiar with your documents and reading them, it puts you in a unique position because one, you can work at any level or at any actor, whether it's a research institution, a government regulator, and you can always leverage that knowledge to advance programs to access financing available. If there's, for instance, at the national scale in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a national green fund, which has a mandate at this point in time legislatively to deal with research, to deal with conservation. And there's work also to put it into law that it will also have to address climate change and aspects related to environmental policy and multinational agreements. At an international level, just to expand a little bit, if I zoom all the way out to the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, when you understand, if you really take the time to understand the Paris Agreement, understand what is being asked of countries, you will realize that there is an entire ocean of opportunities for people to get involved in climate science, to get involved in preparing national documents, to get involved in undertaking projects, especially because the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, it brings in international funding. So governments across the world are putting money into this, right? And they're looking for people to do the work. Thanks, Zico.
Okay, so I'm going to go straight into some of the questions that we have been receiving via the Q&A tab. Firstly, I want to highlight a question that's being asked by Juanita Schmidhammer. I hope I pronounced that correctly. You can, Juanita, you can just type to me the proper pronunciation because I know you have some follow-up questions as well. Juanita would like to know, do you have any tips for getting into climate policy work at the entry level? What sorts of positions are good to get started locally and internationally?
Okay. So Juanita, that's a great question. Climate policy work at an entry level. Well, all right, so let me just shift that slightly and let you know that even within climate policy, right, there are different levels of work, right? So you can work at a level of policy development and negotiations, right? And in that case, if you wanted to get into that sort of field, right, I would suggest that you try to find your way into your government ministries that have the responsibility for representing the countries um, at the UNFCCC at that level. The governmental entities and regulators that are responsible for policy development and policy negotiation, that is really where you would want to target, if that is sort of where your first step. Um, and as an entry level position, I mean, this economy broadly is really not easy. You know, there are a lot of opportunities that especially when you now start, it's going to feel like a raw deal. You're talking about internships or short-term contracts or things that don't feel very good. But unfortunately, the way the economy is structured, at least in Trinidad and Tobago, as far as I know, the West, it is a kind of grind that you just unfortunately have to undertake, right? So I would say try to figure out who these particular units or departments are in your public sector, if you're trying to get into that level of policy, and figure out if they have internship programs, figure out if it is that they're willing to take on project assistance, and find your way inside of there. A next way you could deal with policies are the implementation scale. And there are different organizations who, and that these could be academic, civil society, and even government, that implement policy. That's what they do. They receive funds to take the policy and to do things about it, whether it's communicate through education, whether it is to do an on the grounds project to achieve a target in the policy. So if that's a level you're looking at too, I would say, find the organizations that are doing the kind of work that you're interested in, and likewise approach them, figure out where the opportunities are, even if it's to volunteer, because there's a vicious cycle that happens with especially entry level people, right? Or at young when you're young in your career, they want you to you need to have a certain level of experience and knowledge in order to get the job, but you can't get the job because you don't have a certain level of knowledge. So those first steps, as unfortunate as it may seem, it does require a lot of extension on your part to volunteer, to be tenacious, to go after the opportunities until you build that sort of relationships, credibility, and experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. I have another question here from an anonymous attendee.
Sure.
They would like to know, well, firstly, they say that they are doing a bachelor's degree in international relations. They would like to get some advice from you on what career path you think would be best for them to pursue, bearing in mind that they are interested in climate change, as well as how it has been a huge topic in diplomatic circles. They do hope to become a diplomat at one point.
Nice. So that's a great question. And I think, international relations and climate change, I mean, that's definitely a growing area. There are a lot of people that are going into it at different levels. In terms of a career path, it's hard for me to say because I never started from an IR perspective, although I've worked with IR professionals, people who have found themselves into climate policy from an international background, right? But what I would say is that if you want to get into it, yes, you do your degree in IR, but likewise with Juanita, you need to find some ways to get direct exposure to the specific international policies that deal with climate change. And this would be, if it is at a regional level, that would be like the CARICOM. Find ways to be exposed to the CARICOM process. If you are not from, or if you're from a country that relates to, for instance, the OECS, the Eastern Caribbean states, it would be the OECS as a regional body. Try to find yourselves into these bodies that negotiate on behalf of the Caribbean, right? And who are involved very intimately with policy at that level. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to a follow-up question sent in by Juanita. Juanita would like to know, can online courses be a useful avenue to broaden knowledge in specific interests or topics? and how seriously are they regarded when applying for jobs?
I think that online courses are a very, very good way to broaden your knowledge and your perspectives. In terms of how an online course is regarded when it comes to a job, I think it really boils down to whether or not those courses provide some degree of certification, and if the person presenting those courses are a credible name, right? So, for instance, I personally, in the past few months, I developed an interest in learning a little bit more about climate finance. So I took the opportunity to do distance learning and do a course with the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, right? Specifically about climate financing or disaster risk financing. The CRIF has a weight to it. The University of the West Indies and the CRIF, I mean, they as an organization has a certain weight to it. So by even just getting, a sort of certification from them saying that, hey, I'm certified and knowledgeable in this field, it does have some weight. It does have a role to play depending on what I'm applying for or what I am doing. If it is that it's a matter of just general learning, and it might give you a certificate of participation or something like that, it may not necessarily impress an interviewer, or it might not necessarily lead to a job hire just by doing it. However, I think that if you are able to take in that knowledge or assimilate that knowledge, when you present yourself, right, to an interviewer, to a potential person in your network who can connect you to an opportunity, and you sound informed and you sound like you are knowledgeable in the field, that goes a long way. So I definitely do advocate and approve and endorse doing these online courses, developing that bank of knowledge. But I don't want you to expect that just by doing it and having it on paper, it opens up that path for you. You need to be able to take what you've learned and transform that and use that to open the doors.
Thank you. So I have another question here from Kavir Philip. Kavir would like to know, are you aware of any organizations or companies that may need volunteers or that may be offering summer internships with respect to your field of work?
Okay, so yeah, that's a great question. So volunteer summers internships. My field of work, I mean, climate change policies are really, really broad field, right? And there are, as I mentioned in the model, there are many different actors. There are NGOs. To list every NGO, even in Trinidad alone, that deals with climate change is quite a daunting task. However, just starting from civil society, they're always in need of volunteers. If you go to any civil society doing climate action or doing any kind of work and you say, hey, I want to volunteer, I want to help, I want to be part of this, it's very unlikely people tell you no, because they're always in need of hands. In terms of internship opportunities, yeah, there are different internships. I mean, there are obviously paid and unpaid internships. My company, for instance, we are open to internships and paid stipend work for young professionals as well. So it's something that if you're interested in, you could definitely reach out to me and I could talk to you about. And we do it from a private sector perspective, right? We do contracts and we engage governments and provide technical services. For instance, the CRIF, as I mentioned before, which is the regional body that deals with climate insurance, they currently, if I'm not mistaken, they currently have applications open for their internship program. And if you're successful in that program, or I mean, in a successful applicant, they will place you in a number of regional disaster risk management bodies to gain experience. And I believe that's a paid internship as well. And yeah, I mean, I think generally, if I recall correctly as well, a lot of public sector agencies, they also sometimes offer internships as well. So there were years for instance, in my recollection, where the EMA over the summer months would have offered internships opportunities. And if you're interested in this particular topic, they could place you in a unit that deals with these kind of things. So I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Ryan, may I ask, would it be possible for you to stop the screen share so that we can get a more full view?
Sure, no problem.
No worries. Perfect, perfect.
There you go.
Okay, great. So our next question comes from Jamaica. It comes from attendee Matthew Morris, and he would like to know about geothermal energy specifically. I think he wants to get an understanding of what is the geothermal energy landscape like in Trinidad and Tobago, and perhaps find out a little bit more about whether there are any opportunities that exist there.
That's a good question. It's one that I don't want to be presumptuous. I'm not fully in touch with the precise state of geothermal in Trinidad and Tobago. I know that we definitely do have some degree of activity, geological activity. We have mud volcanoes in Trinidad and Tobago, but we don't really have, the really, what do you imagine geothermal to be with lava and big volcanoes like La Soufrière, going on in Trinidad and Tobago. So in terms of the, if I had to guess, and this is only my guess, because like I mentioned, I'm not fully in touch with this information at this moment. If I had to guess, I would say that the opportunities for pursuing a career in geothermal in Trinidad is not very wide. You may need to look at some of the other Caribbean territories that have a lot more volcanic and geothermal activity presence going on. Thank you. Zico, any more questions?
Thank you, Ryan. Yes, we have 2 more questions. I just want to advise everyone as well. I'm closing questions off in 1 minute. So if you have any last minute questions that you would like to submit, please do so right now. So our next question comes from an anonymous attendee who would like to know, if someone would like to undertake research on policy, such as on their own, what would be a good way getting it out to relevant persons, be it academic institutions, government institutions, etc.?
Okay, so if you want to undertake research on policy on your own, so if it is that, say, for instance, you decided that you want to do some research and you want to come up with policy recommendations, right, to inform policy, right, there are many opportunities and avenues for you to get that out to the relevant people. I mean, one way is to identify who these people are. So, like, for instance, in your academic circles, who are the departments that deal with this type of work? In your government system, who are the offices or the agencies that deal with this kind of work? And you could just simply present it to them, right, to the heads of these organizations and say, hey, I've done some work on this thing. I'd really like to meet with some people to share my ideas or to have this discussion. And most likely you'll get a response. I mean, people are usually very busy, but they are also very open to hearing ideas, to hearing things, and to engage in the public in that way. But there's also something that I think that is overlooked a lot, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, which is that we actually have a process, right? We have a legislative sort of statutory process for developing policy, and it requires and even when it's not in law, right, it's best practice. And you find that all our government agencies, all the organs from parliament to every ministry, whenever they need to revise a policy or develop something, they put it out for public comment. And these notices go, people don't see them at all. They come out. Just the other day, in Trinidad and Tobago, they were making amendments to the noise pollution control rules, right? And they put out an ad, it was in the papers, and it said, hey, we're revising this law. Anyone who has suggestions or ideas, write to us. And I'm not too sure what the response was, but based on my experience in working at the EMA when we did the National Environmental Policy, I mean, you really, the response rates can tend to be quite low if it is that, you don't have people on the ball about the issue. So the first part to answer the question is that if you are developing your independent research, right, 1, you could reach out to people directly. 2, keep an eye out for the types of policies and laws that you're interested in. And when the opportunity arises where they invite your comments, public or otherwise, have it there to do. Thanks.
Okay, 1 second. Yes. Thank you, Ryan. So we have, I think, about 2 more questions. The next question, I think, is a pretty interesting one. It comes from an anonymous attendee. They would like to know, how do you stay motivated in this sector when corruption seems to hamper progress?
So this sector, I suppose you would mean the environmental sector. I'm not too sure. I mean, I would say this: you might have a perception of corruption, right? But really and truly, and I'm not saying that it does not exist. But in my view, in my experience, being in this field for about 8 years, what is often perceived as corruption is sort of a misunderstanding. You see, in Trinidad and Tobago, and this is me offering my understanding. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have an environmental management system. That is our law. Our law is the Environmental Management Act. Our national environmental policy says that we are going to achieve sustainable development through management. And in climate change, it's no different. It's about management. And what management means is that there is going to be a balance, a negotiation, and a compromise sometimes between the different actors and what they want to achieve, right? Sometimes for people who are solely in one place, if you're solely a conservationist, if you're solely an NGO, or solely into business, you could see these things as being a loss. You could see these things as being, seen it as a L, where things don't happen, or you might say, hey, there's corruption and this progress is not being made. But I stay motivated because I think of it as really just a balancing act. I think that you can't win everything, and in forward fashion, when you do make progress, it does require compromise and balance. So yeah, that's how I stay motivated. I try to keep things in perspective, that it's an ongoing process and it's about management.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. And Petal A. Joseph, she is a Tobago-based consultant. She would like to know, how difficult is it for you to sustain yourself as a full-time consultant?
So in terms of sustaining yourself as a full-time consultant, consultancy, it's not like being an employee, right? So it's not like where you just sort of go into a job, and regardless of whether or not you sleep at their work or you do their work, you get a salary at the end of the month. Consultancy is a type of work where you need to always be on the hunt. Think about it that way, right? There's always bids and contracts and other things that come out that you need to present yourself for. And there are times you'll be rejected and there are times you'll be successful. How sustainable it is depends on really whether or not you have a high value skill, and whether or not you have the qualifications and the experience to keep those contracts coming in and to keep being awarded those contracts. So I would say for new people, like if you came straight out of school and you decided that you're going straight into consultancy, it's going to be really, really difficult. But if it is that you had a few years under your belt, like I did, I didn't go into consultancy really until I was about 8 years into my environmental career, and I had already built a reputation and relationships with a lot of actors, and I had a very firm understanding of certain things, and I developed very specific skills that I knew people would need. So depending on where you are in terms of your wisdom, your experience, and your skills, it could be very hard, it could be very easy. But for me personally too, it hasn't been very hard. It's been quite good.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. And moving on to our last question, which comes from Michaela Hussein. Michaela would like to know, would you say entrepreneurship is an important means of obtaining a job in this field? Or are there also a lot of opportunities to work under existing organizations?
So in this field, when you say this field, I'm thinking specifically about climate change policy and science, right? Not broader environmental. And in climate change, right now, at least in Trinidad and Tobago, the field is a little bit limited. There are few people hiring, and there is a few opportunities at this point in time, meaning that there are few established companies that are just hiring staff and bringing them on. I mean, so I think that for now, in this moment in 2021, if you want to really get into climate change and do that work full time, entrepreneurship is a strong pull. There's a strong pull to identify these unique opportunities and to start building it yourself. And it's actually I would encourage that, because if you do that, you become the first, right? You become the trailblazer, and you start to really get ahead of the market. Eventually find yourself hiring and taking care of others. Yeah. Thank you so much for your question.
All right. Thank you, Ryan, for offering a response to everybody who submitted a question. Everybody got an answer, and that's excellent. And thank you also for a really thought-provoking and thorough presentation. I think I said so already, but it truly was inspiring to listen to, and we got a lot of feedback. I just want to mention some of the people. Simone Ganpat, Nigel Noriega, and Ryan Simungal expressed their thanks and gratitude to you for an excellent presentation. And I want to say thank you to Juanita Schmidt-Ammer as well for also offering some advice from her knowledge using the chat tab. So with that, I think we have come to the end of today's presentation, learning how to make a career out of saving the planet, which fell under our Earth Day celebrations at the Cropper Foundation. During our intro, I forgot to just give a little summary of what we do at the Cropper Foundation. For those of you who might not be familiar, the Cropper Foundation, we are a non-profit organization based in Trinidad and Tobago that advocates for a sustainable approach to development in the Caribbean region. So if you follow us on social media, you can look out for future activities just like this. If this is the type of thing that you're into, follow us and look out, and hopefully we'll be able to engage once again in the future for future endeavors. All right, so thank you everyone. And with that, I'll be ending the webinar right now. Ryan, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure, Zico. Thank you. Bye.